Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Holistic Health Podcast. Amy, how was your weekend?
Weekend was good. I think I had a really nice quiet one for the first time. I've had just so much on my plate,
Mm,
and although there was still a little bit going on, I actually finally feel like I got some rest, much
yeah.
needed rest. I need to just copy, paste, repeat that for a little bit. What about you?
I was very social, which is out of character for me. I'm like, I do socialize. I'm not a complete hermit, but usually I'll do like one, max two things on the weekend, and usually at least one of them is around surfing. Like that's part of my social time. Um, but one of my friends is here from New Zealand visiting. Hi, Hannah, if you're listening. And it was, yeah, I got to hang out with her on the weekend, and then I had saw another friend, and then Bowen's family was here, and then I did skip one birthday party, which my friend is very like. It's lovely actually having friends who really understand you and are kind of like take the pressure off the like some of the things because as an example in this friendship that I'm talking about, the birthday party I skipped, we she's my main surfing friend. We hang out all the time. We did something on her birthday together, her actual birthday, and it's a very kind of invitation of like, hey, come along if you want to. I want you to know you're invited, but also I know going to it wasn't like a pub, but like something similar, loud, noisy crowds. I've already got a lot on that weekend. She's like, no personal offense taken. That's fine. Like, I just want you to know you're invited and to feel comfortable to be like, thanks so much. Yeah, I think I will skip it this time, but I'm really glad we got to hang out on your actual birthday. It's just lovely having friendship dynamics like that where it's just you can just be honest and still have a good friendship, about where your capacity is at.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful. And what a really, like, this wasn't even planned, by the way, but I feel like this is the perfect way to start this conversation around chronic illness. Because if you are someone who's dealing with anything physically or emotionally or both, having friends like that are worth their weight in gold, right?
Yeah, I know. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's it's something where I know for a lot of people who suffer from a chronic illness, and I don't I don't really feel the need to define it in the way that the medical community might define a chronic illness. I guess for the purpose of this conversation, I feel like a chronic illness that we're referring to is anything within your health that you are dealing with on a relatively ongoing basis. So perhaps it's something that has lasted a year or more, or is, a frequent feature of your life. And I think that um, the reason I'm defining it like that is because I just really I really struggle with putting people in boxes, and I think that experience, if it's something chronic, regardless of whether you fit the box or not, it should be validated. And that's what we want to start with, is just validating the experience of what it can feel like. And for context, we both know how it feels personally for different reasons, and we'll share bits and pieces of our own story in amongst this conversation. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that's worth talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And I would even say, like, putting aside, the allopathic definition of chronic illness, if you've been dealing with something for more than, 2 or 3 months, to me, that has become chronic for sure. Like anything over the 12-week mark, it certainly classifies or qualifies, I should say, as an ongoing issue. And I think there are lots of different types of chronic illness. There are things that just affect your body. There are things that are mental, emotional in nature. It's outside of our scope really to talk about spiritual chronic illness, but like we would be remiss of us not to say that that's also, part and parcel of that. And as practitioners who practice holistic medicine, we always have to consider all of those pieces for every human that we take care of. And I think that surprises some clients. I don't know about you, Nat, but like, in my intake form, I ask people about how they express creativity and joy. And I think it catches a lot of people, partly because many of us are so overwhelmed with just surviving life. Like, it's like, what's that? Or, we've been in survival mode for so long, people are like, oh, I don't even know what I would do for funsies if I had the time and the energy. And that just feels so far away. But regardless of what's on your plate, what you're dealing with, or your experience, chronic illness is very challenging for many, many reasons. And I want to start with the fact that it's often an invisible illness. So, and this part really bugs me actually about human nature. I don't even want to say this is a true reflection of human nature, because I believe it's more of a product of the environment that has contributed to us sort of dehumanizing each other, reduction in empathy, and there's a million sort of elements to that piece. But if someone has a broken leg, or someone has had a car accident and they've got a black eye and, a neck brace on and bruises and cuts, or someone's got, a rash on the outside of their body, we can obviously see that they're dealing with something, and we can, our visual system, recognize this person is compromised and probably needs more support and more care and is suffering. But many of the things we deal with as humans are actually not visible like that. And there is a very strange disconnect that, we can say to someone, we're in this much pain, or we're this fatigued, or we're experiencing these symptoms. And for some weird reason, you can hear those words, or the person you're telling can hear those words, but they still just don't compute because you look fine. And I can say, with having mold illness, where I had chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, bunch of other stuff going on, one of the things that my husband is, my now husband, he wasn't my husband at the time, has said, and has even said in recent times, it's like, it's really hard to know where you're at because you don't look sick. Now, I also am an Enneagram 3 on that system, which is someone who is very intentional about showing up like everything looks fine in every sense of the word. So, in the depths of my sickness, I couldn't shower, but like, the minute I had enough energy to do that, my energy first went into making sure hair, makeup, clothes. And so that also makes things tricky. But it didn't seem to matter that I was saying I feel X, Y, and Z, and I feel terrible and I'm exhausted and I don't have the energy to do the basics of life. I still looked fine on the outside, and that can be really, really hard. And I think also, when you're really unwell, you don't want to keep talking about it. You want to keep telling people that. You don't want to feel like a broken record for a start. And I don't know about how others feel, but I feel like if I've said it once, that is the announcement and that is where it stands. And so I really resent having to repeat myself around stuff like that. So you end up suffering in silence in a way because people just forget. And on one hand, I understand that people are very busy, where so many of us are concerned with what other people think about us, but most people aren't thinking about us at all and really remember very little about what's going on for us. And so they just carry on with their lives. And people really relate to the world through a lens of how they feel and how they see it. And then they just kind of see and feel everybody else's stuff through that same lens. So that's really hard because you can feel left behind. You feel like the whole world just carries on. I'm sure it's a very similar feeling, if you lose someone in your life and the whole world just keeps turning like nothing happened when you've just lost someone really important to you, or, there's an immediate kind of, if you're unwell or someone's injured or dies, there's an immediate kind of rallying of the community and everyone just goes back to their normal lives and you're just kind of left to kind of languish in the life that you now have. So that's a really difficult part about that. And by extension of that, if people aren't really hearing you and you're also not visibly unwell, they can judge you or misjudge you. And I've seen and heard that just ad nauseum with clients that I've had with chronic illness. I wasn't on the receiving end of too much of that, at least face to face, although there was definitely judgment from colleagues that wasn't spoken directly to me that made its way back to me. At the time, then I was really sick. And I think because people don't understand the nature of chronic illness unless they've experienced it, they can look at you like you're just not trying hard enough, or you just need to push through. You know, I've heard, oh, everyone gets tired sometimes, you know, but I can tell you, having experienced devastating fatigue and mitochondrial inflammation, and more recently, now that I'm well, experiencing normal person tired, they are not the same. They are worlds apart. Like normal person tired, you can still do stuff tired. It might take you longer, your performance might not be as good, but you can kind of muscle through the essentials. Like with fatigue, I remember a client saying to me 15 years ago now, I think it would have been, and this is before I had mold illness, so I didn't know what this experience was like, but I since can relate. She said to me, if my house went up in flames, I would just have to go down with it. I do not have the energy to get out of bed. And I believed her, but I also didn't have a lived experience of it until I got sick with mold. And I was like, yeah, wow. And I absolutely, hand on heart, same. The house went up in flames now, I would just lie here and burn. I've just got nothing in the tank. So, you know, being told to push through or try harder, or I think this is also where I was gaslighting myself a bit. I was like, oh, I'm just really stressed, or I'm not managing my stress that well, or I could be sleeping better and I need to work harder on exercise and habits to feel better. So that's really challenging. And then, of course, you've got that horrible position in where you end up being gaslit. You end up being labeled a hypochondriac, or someone who's being a bit melodramatic, or someone not really believing you. And this definitely happened to me. At the time, we were pursuing legal action against the owners of the property we'd been in because they knew there was a leak and left us in there for 5 months. So we were deliberately exposed, if you like. And I went to see a GP to document everything. And my brain had absolutely turned to shit at that time. I couldn't remember anything. So I had written a long list of things, of all of my symptoms, because I didn't want to forget anything. And she cut me off. I don't even think I was halfway through. She was, quite frankly, a bitch. She was awful, and I was so hurt and I was so shocked. Even though I hear of this disgraceful behavior quite frequently from clients, I still operate from the belief system that doctors are good humans who really want to help people. So I was in that appointment fully expecting to be heard and cared for. And I think it was even worse because it was a female. I felt betrayed by another woman, but she just viciously cut me off and was sneered at me. Like the contempt was just dripping off her. And she was like, oh, she was kind of staring down at my phone like, what else have you got in there? Anything else? Anything else?
Oh my god.
It was disgusting. And I think I would have burst into tears, except I was so shocked. I froze. And at the time, like at that point, I actually knew what it was. I was already starting to seek treatment. It wasn't like I was frightened about what's wrong with me. I cannot even imagine how devastating that would have felt if I didn't already have like knowledge of what was going on and where to go. I would have been, I might have just passed away from just devastation because it was the mistreatment was revolting. And I think that's probably a more extreme and obtuse example where someone was visibly dismissive. But I think, there's degrees of that, and you can feel that as a human being when someone's kind of internally going, really, really. And I honestly think, this is my opinion, most people are not lazy. Anyone who's judged as lazy, it's either mental health, depression, or it's low energy. I don't actually think that's part of human nature for the most part. And I think the label of hypochondria is also used far too often. And it's really, again, it's lazy medicine in the sense that if you can't find the answer, you're like, oh, well, she must be making it up, or he must be making it up. There's nothing in the textbooks about this. So that, I think, provides that's actually almost as traumatizing or more so than the illness sometimes. You have this
Yeah.
burden of being really unwell, mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever it is, and then you have to deal with that and to be an advocate for yourself when you're feeling so sick. So I think, yeah, that's one of the biggest things up front that I'll say is just really, really hard as someone who has dealt with chronic illness and I understand is difficult for anyone who's in the trenches with it as well.
Yeah, it's so, you're right, like everything you said. And going back to that experience that you had when you were really unwell, where there's this unfortunate misinterpretation and then projection of how tired you must be based on any individual's experience of how tired they've been and what that feels like. And I was in your world at that time. We weren't close friends at all, but I remember being in the room hearing people speak about you in that way, as in like eavesdropping. Basically, I wasn't in the
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
because it was an open office, and I've got really good hearing. And I remember feeling really angry, and I think it was because I didn't know you, like I didn't know you well. I knew that you had mold illness. I imagined what that would feel like, and I had had my own experience of utter fatigue as someone who is an absolute go-getter, energizer bunny usually. And so I think it, as you know, you've kind of said, when you've had the lived experience, it's so much easier to relate.
Yeah.
And then I also think that with that, it's, you know, like the isolation can be really real. And I know that in my experience as well, as you said, around feeling like a bit of a burden because you're retelling the story over and over again, or someone asks how you are, and it's like, do I be honest and like retell the same story and feel like, you know, a wet blanket weighing the conversation down, or do I, you know, do that thing where we just put on a brave space and then create more separation in the relationship because you're not being honest about how you feel. And I personally really struggle with both ends of those spectrums. I'm someone who finds it really hard to not just tell the truth and be open-hearted, and at the same time, probably one of my biggest quote-unquote limiting beliefs is feeling like a burden to others. And I think I don't think I'm alone in that feeling of being torn between the two, and everyone has a unique experience, but I feel like I've spoken to enough people to know that there are threads there that are universal in the space of suffering from a chronic illness. And mine, just because it might come up in the conversation as we move forward, mine's different to yours, Ames. As you know, the 2 points in my life where I had what I would call a chronic illness would be when I was in my late teen years, early 20s, when I woke up one day and I basically went from exercising 7 days a week, twice a day for probably 2 to 3 hours, to not being able to walk more than like 50 to 100 meters without pain, and I was wearing a neck brace. And again, no one knew what was wrong with me, like it was a complete mystery. So that time, and then later on in my life, and still now, this is a current challenge, though I'm touch wood improving significantly at the moment, is period pain, which I know so many people can relate to. And I think that with period pain as well, and I'm speaking to that because I know it's quite a common thing that many listeners would experience, or at least know someone in your world that does, whether they have diagnosed endo or they're telling you that they have really painful periods, is that most women in your life, if they're of menstruating age and they're not currently pregnant or breastfeeding, have a period. So everyone thinks that they know what it's like to have a period. But I think what happens when you're someone who's had really, really severe period pain, I think that it's really hard you feel like sometimes you've got to defend and advocate for just how significant it is, but it's really challenging because you also know that internally, naturally, most people are comparing it to their own experience of period pain. I do think that changes depending on the person that you're speaking to and their ability and bandwidth for compassion and imagining something that's outside their own personal experience. But I do know that that certainly was part of my story. Like when I was working in an office and I was part of a team and I would get my period and I was at work and I had to go home. I was diarrheaing, vomiting, nausea, sweating, and I was responsible for like talking to people constantly. I could not. And then I would have to say to my manager and my team, oh, I'm really sorry, I need to go home because I've got my period. And I could feel, not from all of them, but I could feel the judgment of like, really, like you're going home for period pain. And, you know, why not just take some pain relief and soldier on? And I had already taken probably enough pain relief, but anyway.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, that's just validating that experience that it it is really hard when it's something that is invisible. And I think the other thing or another point that can be really challenging is just the mental load of managing the symptoms, the appointments if you're engaged in either the process of trying to figure out what's wrong or the process of maintaining whatever health is or health is still there. And then also for a lot of people, if you are in active management or treatment of it, regardless of what that is, just the mental load sometimes of like, have I got all of my supplements? Have I taken them on time? Have I like eaten enough of whatever food I'm supposed to be eating enough of? And I think that it can feel, if you have this mindset or if you're just in a moment and having your moments is fine, I too have them still, is like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not just like this one thing that feels like a lot. It's that there's lots of little things that need to come together in order to give you the quality of life that you're striving for or that is the best that you're accessing at the moment.
Yes, yeah, mental load is absolutely huge for sure. Another, I guess, maybe extension of like the impact of chronic illness on mental health is the way it can impact your identity and sense of purpose. And this is again, like it's like an additional struggle on top of whatever condition or disease that you're dealing with. I know when I got sick, it was so devastating. I'd taken long service leave from work. I had refinanced my investment property at the time, so I had like a cushion, a financial cushion, so that if I didn't earn $1 in that 15 months or what it is, I would be okay. But I never expected that would happen, and that money was actually meant to go into investing in another stream for my business. At the time, I don't know if anybody is or how many people are aware of this, but I'm an esthetician. And so also do a lot of stuff to do with skin. I was hand making my own skincare in my early 20s. I then ended up really kind of specializing in acne, chronic skin disorders for a long time. And I was very passionate about it. And that year that I took off, I wanted to write a book, create my own skincare line, which I'd already done once before, and create a program for women who had chronic adult acne. And I literally couldn't do a damn thing that year. And it was so heartbreaking. And what that meant was, for me, it felt like, this is obviously a unique experience to me, but I felt like I had this window of opportunity to sort of change or improve my life that I got completely robbed of, which was so devastating. But also, just prior to moving into the property that made me sick, I had accidentally done a 9K fun run, which is a bit of an oxymoron because I know.
How do you accidentally run 9 kilometers?
So, well,
you're going to have to explain.
Look, first of all, I hate running. And I didn't run the 9K, the whole 9Ks, but I was trying to like not hate running. So, and at the time, Nat and I worked for a company called Bioceuticals. It was owned by Blackmores. Blackmores would do the Sydney Fun Run every year, right? And we got complimentary entry into that as staff members. And I actually signed up for the 4K, whatever the smallest family one is, and I trained for it because I was trying to challenge myself to run that far without stopping. But I don't know what happened. I think my husband, his mate, they were doing the half marathon. We all kind of went there together. I ended up in the wrong starting group. And then, I don't know, it just all went pear-shaped and I was all of a sudden like in this crowd and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. And they actually hadn't put up the signs for the 4K yet. And so I just started following these other signs. And it was the 9K. But I say all of that to say, even though I hated running, I was a very fit person. I was very active. And that was, you know, kind of hilarious and annoying, but fun and easy at the same time. And then I went from that to not being able to walk more than 50 meters on a flat street without like wheezing like someone with emphysema. And it was very difficult mentally to like adjust from viewing myself as a fit, healthy, well, like able-bodied and able-minded person, because I kept trying to operate like I was well when I absolutely wasn't. And that's one risk with chronic illness. And I know you're going to talk about sort of trying to catch up and claw back things. The other risk, though, on the other side is overly identifying with your diagnosis. And this is a very double-edged sword. In the chronic illness space, in the spoonie world, whatever it is you're suffering with, it can provide a lot of comfort to find others who are having the same or similar lived experience, and friendships born within a cohort like that. There's this instant understanding where you don't have to explain yourself or defend or, you know, beg to be understood, or if your illness gets in the way of like socializing, whether it's virtually or in person, like you're just understood, which is of such a huge comfort. But what I have noticed, which is really unhealthy, is how it becomes their identity and their personality, and they build a world or a life around it, or an Instagram account, as I so often see, and you end up trauma bonding with your diagnosis, and in some ways trauma bonding with people a little. It's more what you have in common as your illness rather than necessarily aligned values or interests, and that can actually keep people really stuck. So finding and readjusting can be a challenge, and walking the line between seeking comfort and companionship with those who are having a similar experience without losing yourself in it, I think is definitely an area I notice people find hard to navigate, or perhaps aren't aware that there's a risk of actually becoming more stuck. And one thing I really notice within that type of community is people no longer put their energy and attention on identifying the root cause, healing and recovering themselves. And I'm not saying you have to choose one or the other, but I think, you know, pretending you're not sick, which is what I tried to do, doesn't work. And then also adopting the belief that this is how you're always going to feel is equally as dangerous.
Yeah, so well said. And it is such a fine line, isn't it? And I actually think that that one example is even in the endometriosis space, there's been so much power in there being more awareness around period pain, around endometriosis, and also I do think that I've seen firsthand some of the damage that does when it's taken to the extreme, even in the language sometimes that's developed. Like, I personally, and if this has helped you, table it, but personally for me, like, the term endo warrior, the connotations of that are very like me fighting against my body, against this illness, and being in constant battle. And I so understand where that comes from, because it's so hard to go through endometriosis and all that it entails, and to not feel a degree of betrayal or frustration or anger towards your body. And also, I don't think that letting yourself go further and further down that path, and this could be true in the context of the anger, the frustration, the betrayal that can be felt in any chronic illness, I don't feel like it adds any value to your life or to the capacity for you to heal. I think that there needs to be that balance, as you said, between true validation and true, like, I acknowledge that this is hard, I know what that's like, or I can relate, yeah, it's shitty. And also other conversations that are led more around like life out, like beyond that or outside of that or alongside it, that isn't just looping on the same thing, that ultimately I think is a false sense of support. It's because I do think also, if we're speaking more into the emotional side of it and the identity side of it, is that if you so strongly identify with the label that you've been given or the group that you belong to, having had being labeled with this whatever illness it is, that means that if you step away from that, you have a lot to lose. You lose your identity, you lose your community. And so by nature, I think that because we want to belong, we strive to feel like we know ourselves and we have a sense of self. It's very hard to then move away from something like that. And so that's where I know that it can sound like just semantics and, you know, does it really matter? But I do think it really matters, because the language we use, the stories we tell ourselves, the things we say out loud constantly shape a lot of our beliefs, our thoughts, our actions, and therefore our life. And again, like, it's not like there's so much nuance to it, because it's not about bypassing your experience, and it's also about having a choice around how you relate to the experience that you're having is where I've gotten to it. And by the way, not gotten to it in one step. Like, I definitely spent a really long time feeling angry that I tried so hard and I did all of the right things and I practiced what I preached, and that I was still suffering from painful periods. Or in the previous example of when I was in my early 20s, when I had tried so hard, I was trying so hard and doing everything everyone told me, and yet still in that position of struggle. So I definitely don't say it in the way of like, come on, you've just got to see the silver lining and the bright side. I just know from lived experience that sitting in the space of only the victimhood of it and the shittiness of it and the injustice of it, it doesn't actually make it any better to deal with. If anything, personally, I found it just becomes so much more all-consuming. And so I think, yeah, it's that balance.
So hard. And I think that infiltrates so many elements. And as you said, like the friendships forged in that space can feel so nourishing and supportive, but can also leave you feeling a bit trapped and anchored in that. So yeah, it is really, really tricky. And then when you layer on top of that, you know, how that might set up dynamics within family, and in my case it really was primarily work relationships that were a struggle at the time. You know, I was a presenter flying around the country, sometimes overseas, to deliver, you know, speak at conferences, webinars, whatever it was. And I very quickly realized, like, most hotels are moldy. And, you know, this is a really interesting side note, everyone thinks that when they get sick, when they travel, it's from the germs on the plane. It's actually, in my experience, it's actually the germs at the accommodation in the air conditioning. Because as soon as I trained as a mold testing technician, started really identifying what was wrong with the places I was staying. There's one or two places in every major city here in Australia that are safe for me to stay in. And it was really hard advocating for myself to be able to keep doing my job, but not to get sick. And I felt like, yeah, it was really hard not to buy into the belief that I was being a diva and being, when I said, I need to stay at a certain place because otherwise I'll get unwell. And yeah, I couldn't come into the office because the office was heavily water damaged. But of course, there were people in there who were resentful because they were sick and weren't advocating for themselves to work out of the office. And then there was others who were a bit old school who felt like, you had to show up and do, FaceTime 9 to 5, Monday to Friday to be seen and considered productive. And there was power dynamics and insecurities and projections playing out. And it was just so much extra stress I didn't need. And that extra energy to advocate for myself was really hard. And then, of course, there's those tangible elements around having to have time off work. It was so interesting. Like, I noticed a pattern where I would come to work Monday, Tuesday, and then I'd end up being sick, and I'd have to take, like, I'd either be off sick Wednesday or Thursday, and I didn't know at the time it was because the office was toxic, and I would kind of feel, recover on the weekend, come in for a few days, and then I would deteriorate and repeat. But I did notice the pattern. I just didn't know why. But of course, with chronic illness, you never know, like, with endo, perhaps we know a few days, maybe a week out of every cycle. That's probably going to be a week you're taking time off. But typical sick leave allowances don't allow for, 12 periods a year or thereabouts for that sort of time. And therefore, once that's gone, if you catch the flu or something else happens, you get an injury, you're eating into leave time, personal leave time. You've got challenges with medical costs. Oh my God, like CSIRS, although there was a parliamentary inquiry into it in 2018, and the Australian government have since allocated $1.5 million to studying it. It's just really not recognised properly yet, and the funding, we're just at the very beginning, really, which means none of the tests that are done to determine whether or not someone has it are covered. Just the testing alone, I didn't even do all of the testing, but I did all of the bloods, was $2,000. I couldn't work for that entire time I had off. So every single one of my basic living expenses, I think it cost me like $120,000 in that 15 months. Like almost every dollar I had in the bank. And this wasn't, some of it was savings, but some of it was refinancing my apartment. Like this was meant to be a business loan to help me get my, this other side of my clinical work up. And then there's access to care. And I know there's challenges wherever you go. There's only so many specialists. Specialists have waiting lists, finding the right person. If you do not have the financial resources to pay out of pocket for the best care, you're left stuck with really just inappropriate, insufficient care often. And sometimes even money doesn't make a difference. Like I see a lot of people with chronic and complex illnesses. Usually there's an environmental component. Most often it's from toxic mold, if not, solely, that's a big part of it. And when I look around at all of the CSIRS literate GPs, so I've got thankfully a couple that I refer for prescriptions, but if anyone actually needs GP-led care in this space, it's like a 6-month waiting list, and you literally feel like you're dying and can't live another day or a week, and it's like, oh, you can't see them until, March 2026. It's so devastating, and the distress that causes just adds more of a psychological burden, dysregulates your nervous system, impacts your ability to heal. So it just, all in all, we just want to really, I guess, have this conversation to acknowledge the challenges. This is not even an exhaustive list, right? But just we understand where you're at and what you're going through, both from a clinician's point of view, but also a lived experience point of view. That being said, having been through it ourselves with various different labels and different chapters of our life, we also have got real life experience on navigating our way through it and what worked for us to support ourselves. And we're not sharing this from, again, this is an exhaustive list. because of course it isn't, or necessarily that all of these things are going to work for you too. But I think let's maybe start talking about what has helped us now that we've talked about how bloody awful the experience
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, totally. And I guess for me, one important thing that I felt I needed to do as a first step, even, or maybe not a first initial step, but part of the initial steps was just grieving. Like grieving, I guess the past version of myself pre any of it happening, because I think that I was gripping so tightly onto that it was very hard to let go, and I was just trying to crawl and claw at my way back to that version of me, whereas I don't think you can never go back. Like that's just the reality of whatever experience you have in life. You can't go back, you can only move forward. And I think it was grieving that, and also got like moving to a level of acceptance that I perhaps had different or new limitations that I hadn't had before, but not allowing myself to think that that meant that I couldn't find joy or hope in my life. And I think it took me a really long time, but I know that when I did feel like I fully let go of that, and ironically, I actually think that in hindsight, that first time that I was really unwell, where I was in my 20s and everything just felt like it got pulled out from under me. I really believe, I look back at that time and I really believe that it happened for me because I only really valued myself based on the fact that I was perceived as the healthy one, the fit one. I had a lot of my identity built around being able to be just like an Energizer bunny, and and also being able to be the one in my friendship circle that knew the most about health. And and I guess that was also off the back of a 10-year eating disorder where, again, my whole identity was around a similar, like, body-based image situation. And I really think that having this kind of rug fully pulled out from under me, where I actually couldn't access any of what I felt like gave me value. And of course, this is my own perception. None of my friends or my family are telling this to me, but it really made me look at and go, well, if it's not that, why am I of value to the people in my life or the world around me? What is it about me that is unique or special or lovable? And I think that, I don't know, I mean, maybe I would have through a different crisis later in life, but I think that I wouldn't have stopped to consider that or reframe my relationship with myself if I was given another choice, because I was just so in it, in being the person that I was back then, until I was kind of given no choice but to change and take a really good hard look at things. And honestly, I would probably not be here speaking to everyone right now if I didn't go through that experience, because it was that was really the catalyst into naturopathic and more holistic and functional medicine. And and being really, I mean, there's no greater motivator about learning everything you can about hormones and gut health and thyroid when you've struggled with it personally, or at least that was my experience. So I do think it really it lit a fire in me to help other people. And I was already a really compassionate person, but I think it only gave me more compassion and more empathy and more space for people and their struggles, even if it wasn't something that I had lived personally or that I couldn't see externally. So yeah, I think really going through that grieving process was important.
Yeah, it is. And you can really only like do that once you've accepted where you are. And I absolutely relate to that, just refusal and just pushing that away and struggling to claw back, where I had been, who I was, which is, yeah, as you said, you can only move forward. And I think For me, if anyone's in the middle of it now, I can hand on heart say now, having come out the other side, I'm so much healthier and more well for having learnt what I've learnt, and also having to learn what to work in partnership with my body. But I couldn't access any of those things until I accepted where I was at. And I'm not even going to try and pretend that I fully accepted it, but you can't really grieve what you've lost until you've kind of acknowledged where you're currently at. And if you're fighting just to kind of get out of it, you actually, I think it leaves you more stuck than anything. And I think, yeah, it's by extension of that, your identity unfortunately does have to shift a little bit. And this doesn't have to be a bad thing at all, but this is really that fine line around aiming for where you want to be, which is healing, fully healed, fully functioning, able to work, able to socialize, able to feel comfortable in your own skin and around other people, like whatever it is that you're dealing with that feels really hard right now. And, you know, not over identifying with what's going on for you, but also not pretending that it's not a thing for you either. And I think the way to do that is really to adopt who am I going to be for now? So it doesn't have to be I'm giving up on ever feeling well again, and I'm just a spoonie, a chronic illness girly. Nor does it have to be I'm really healthy, well and fit, and this is just a momentary glitch. I think just acknowledging that you're in a chapter of your life where your attention and your energy, you require a lot more of it for your healing and a lot more space holding for yourself is a big part of that. And looking at ways you can continue to express your identity and of the parts of you that you value most, but also trying on new things and exploring new things and finding joy, finding peace, finding fulfillment in ways that it maybe look different. And I don't know, like it could honestly be anything, but I think doing something creative is a good thing to consider. So just side note, I feel like I should start an OnlyGrans. I've recently taken up knitting and I wish I'd done it. I know. I'm like my inner 85-year-old's currently online. And I feel like it would have been a really good thing for me to maybe do while I didn't have energy to do physical things. But anyway, better late than never. I'm actually doing it for a few reasons, but one of them is it's a really nice way just to slow my nervous system down. It's a screen-free activity. It's meditative. And I'm not suggesting you take up knitting, but, you know, whether it's painting, drawing, colouring by numbers, cross-stitch, latch hooking, knitting, I don't know, Lego, like having something you can do that Lego, I don't know, I'm just riffing here, but something you can do that doesn't drain your physical or your mental energy, that you can do in any environment, you know, from your bed, for example, if you're not well, to actually give you something to focus on that's not your symptoms or your healing, you know, it's a mental holiday thing. Give yourself a mental holiday. Yes, movies are good for that. Yes, reading books, fiction books is good for that. But I found when I was really unwell, I couldn't read more than a few sentences of a book before my brain would forget where I was at. So that's really difficult. But the other piece of that is feeling like you're making a meaningful difference in the world. I think as most humans, probably all of them, unless there's something really wrong, we like to feel like we're making a contribution to the world. We like to feel like we're making a difference to people's lives. I think that's human nature, to share, you know, and help each other grow and have a richer life experience. And the way you contributed or sought meaning or added value, like in your case, Nat, for me, it was very performance-based and very much what my brain had to offer. My brain absolutely went down the toilet. I had nothing. I couldn't learn anything new. I could barely string a sentence together. It was terrifying. It was also how I earned a living. And so that was incredibly threatening in like a survival type of sense, to not be able to function even in my job, let alone in community. But finding ways that you can be in community and feel like you're contributing, that doesn't like drain your energy or limit your capacity in some ways, is also really important. And that can be just a work in progress. There's no need to rush out and try and fix anything or change anything. But part of that acceptance process of going, okay, I'm now in a season where I'm, dealing with this, and it's unfortunately an undefined amount of time. But while I'm in it, how can I set my life up in such a way that I still feel nourished and connected and stimulated and creative and contributing, that doesn't tax me, I think would be an important thing to consider.
Yeah, I love that. And I think another thing I sought out or did was I was really mindful of who was in my inner circle and who I was spending time with. And it was this balance between not necessarily seeking out people who had had the same experience as me. I definitely had and still have people in my life that can relate to the experiences that I've had or still have at times with painful periods. And that's really validating and important and comforting, and they would be the people that I would go to if I was needing to vent, if I was needing to just get something off my chest, and I knew that they would understand without me having to justify or explain it. But I was also really mindful of not overbuying into that space, of not only having people in my world that were in a similar situation. And I certainly did make an effort not to spend time around people where I felt all we did was ruminate or circle back on the shittiness of whatever the situation was, but more that it was broader. And again, different journeys for me. I do feel like I sought out different things because I needed different things in those two journeys that I kind of went through. But I also think, coming back to what I was sharing at the very beginning of the episode, is just having really good quality friends. Like I'm so lucky about like with the people that I have in my life, and of course you're one of those, Ames, that I feel like my friends are all incredibly emotionally intelligent, able to hold space without trying to fix me, are very encouraging and like expressive with words about what they love about me or my strengths, and also very able to be present with me when I'm showing sides of myself that are that I maybe carry some shame around, or I carry that sense of like, is this too much? Am I a burden? And I think the only way you really learn who those people are is follow your instincts and have a go at sharing and see what the response is like. But I have to say that every time that I've been brave enough to share my struggles and my vulnerabilities with the friends in my inner circle, it's only ever been met with like, it's exceeded my expectations. And my expectations weren't a reflection of them as humans, it was more of a reflection of like my were my problems or my perceptions or where I was at mentally too much for someone to handle or hold. And so I do think that you don't necessarily have to have friends in your life that have had the exact same experience as you, but I do think having friends or practitioners, if your friend circle at the moment just doesn't have that capacity, that aren't afraid of your pain or your discomfort, but also aren't going to like just sink down with you. They're just there, and I think that is incredibly healing in and of itself.
Absolutely. And figuring that out quickly is really helpful, and focusing on those that are contributing to your healing is really important, and not really setting yourself up. If someone's dismissive of what's going on for you, that's just contributing to the illness, really. So yeah, be mindful of that, for sure. And another thing I think that's really helpful is focusing on what's going well or improving or is holding steady or you still have claim to. And what I mean by that is when you're unwell, the symptoms of discomfort or distress obviously are front and center as far as your focus goes, especially when you're in, seeing people for treatment. You're constantly talking about it. You're in this body that's experiencing it all the time. And that's totally understandable, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. However, you can do yourself a favor by also putting aside intentionally energy and focus on the things that are good. So it might be, some days for me it was, I'm still alive. I didn't die overnight. And I know that sounds incredibly dramatic, but there was times where I was going to bed so sick, I actually thought I might die in my sleep. And I actually don't know if I ever went to sleep hoping I would die, but I do remember the morning that I explanted, I didn't care if I died. I was so sick. But it's very easy to sort of be overwhelmed and focus on the things that aren't right. But for me, some days it was just, I've survived and I've got another day, I've got another opportunity to, improve, get well, figure it out, try and shift the needle. It might be, I remember another time saying, oh, at least my toes don't hurt, because I had fibromyalgia and like literally I was in so much pain, like you couldn't even just touch me. But I'm like, is there anywhere in my body where I'm not in pain? And I'm like, oh, my big toe feels all right. So I would like bring my attention down to that. Celebrating wins as well. So when I was in the depths of the chronic fatigue, I literally had, if you don't know what a spoonie is, Google it. But in essence, it's a term used in the chronic illness community where they describe units of energy as spoons. And most people have a cutlery drawer full of stuff and can kind of, willy-nilly spend their spoons. It's a spoon for a shower, a spoon for brushing your teeth, a spoon for making breakfast, a spoon for cleaning up, a spoon for the commute to work. When you have chronic fatigue, you might have one or two spoons in the drawer. And for me, I basically had to choose whether I ate that day or showered. And so I would go a week or more sometimes without a shower because, my husband, or it wasn't my husband at the time, would make me breakfast, but then like he wouldn't be home till the evening. So it was like, well, have I eaten enough to like make it through to dinner and then I'll spend that one spoon that I have on having a shower or doing some laundry, or do I not have a shower and have a meal? It was diabolical. So for me, celebrating the wins started at, I showered and made myself a meal today. I had enough spoons to do both. And then it became, I have enough spoons to shower every day, and I've got the energy to go and do a grocery shop on the weekend. And, when I got to that point, I could either do a grocery shop or I could do a social event, not one or the other. So I would say to my husband, are you okay to do the grocery shopping? And that way we can go and have dinner at our friend's house. I don't have enough spoons to do both. And then I celebrated when I was able to have enough energy to do a supermarket shop and do a social event on the weekend. And then it became celebrating doing 2 social events in a week. And now I still actually celebrate now if I've had like a particularly social weekend. It was, my husband's birthday recently, and we had a lunch, and then we had a party the next day, then we had a concert the next day. And then I went straight back into work. I mean, that's extraordinary. And I do not take it for granted that I have enough energy to do that now, even though most people probably would. But what I would start doing, if you're at the beginning of this healing journey, is either journal it so you can reflect on it. If you're having a bad moment, which I had plenty of them, I could go back and look at, this was a win, or I had these successes, or I had these highlights. It's not all bad. Now, it might be easier if you have a bit more of a visual, like almost like a vision board, where you can kind of write down or tick off every time something good happens. I do currently have like a manifestation list on my phone for different reasons, but like when wonderful things happen to me, I write it down. And then if I'm ever having a moment where I'm feeling like life is against me or I hate my life, I'll like go back and kind of reflect on, apart from all the wonderful things that I obviously have and the wonderful people in my life, I can be like, oh, no, actually there is lots of good things happening. So whether that's, reflecting with your partner at the end of the day or a friend about what went well, or writing it down, or, drawing it out on a vision board, I think that's important too.
Yeah. And also, it makes me think of reminding people as well that often the body doesn't heal in the way that you want, it heals in the way that it's just going to heal. And what I mean by that is sometimes the thing that you want to change the most might be you just want more energy, but the first thing that shifts might be that, I don't know, your brain fog slightly lifts, or your right arm stops hurting, or that you stop getting ovulation pain, but you still got really bad period pain. Or, I think that that's also something to do your best to surrender to, that you don't necessarily have control over the order in which things start to improve, but just to try your best to still acknowledge the things that are improving, and that you're having small wins with, even if they're not your top three priorities straight away. Because I do think that stopping to acknowledge those gives you some form of momentum to be able to continue to feel positive and hopeful about those other things changing with time as well. Um, and then I'd also say, for me personally, and look, this is just a reflection of my personality, so this may or may not be something that helps you, but I, for my whole life, have always found a lot of comfort in humour, in helping me in any crisis, whether it's health related, life related. Like, I can't tell you the amount of times that my mum and I used humour to get through her whole breast cancer journey. And in moments where humour outside looking in would have been looked at as being very inappropriate, but for us, it's a way of coping, and not a way of bypassing the difficulty of the emotional experience or not talking about it, but a way of just trying to bring lightness to a lot of dark and heavy. And I think that, obviously pick your moments with who you're doing that with. Some people can meet you there and some can't. But I really find it supportive for me. And even just having humor or joy in my life, if I'm not bringing it, then seeking out other people that can bring that, or just listening to something funny or something that just takes takes the heaviness out of a moment or an experience or a life event or a situation, I really feel like that's helped, as well as just trying to cultivate, which again I think has been a lesson gifted to me through all of the quote unquote health crises that I've had, is really choosing to develop more self compassion. Because I feel like I've got a lot of it for other people, whether I know them or whether I don't. But I do think that something that struggling with my health in the past has really brought me is no, well, I did have a choice, and I guess the choice I made was to try and be more compassionate, give myself more grace. And it's to come from someone who had an eating disorder for 10 years, where your whole inside thought it's horrible in there. I mean, I know that I'm not alone in that, which is why I'm kind of speaking for more people than just myself, which I shouldn't do. So I will go back to speaking from I, but I know that how I talked to myself back then before all of this is so different. Now I feel like for the most part, I'm on my side. Of course, I'm still a human, and I have things that I say to myself that aren't particularly kind, but I don't feel like that's now running the show. And so I do think it's an opportunity to try and cultivate compassion for yourself, because you are going to have to live in your head for your whole life. And so it is an invitation into that as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think working on that self-talk is so important. I mean, certainly I'm also someone who's very into dark humor, and I'm thinking about the time I shit myself and still went out. I have talked about this on the podcast before, and basically, I was living in this moldy place. We hadn't gotten out of it yet. It had affected literally every part of my body, including my bowels. And I had, so my husband, he's my boyfriend at the time, had gone down to like, was it Four Pines in Manly? And we were catching up with friends who were in town, right? So it was kind of not just like an average catch up, it was like kind of important. And I walked down later because I was obviously low on energy. It took me longer to get ready. I'm like, I'll meet you down there. And we lived up on Darley Road, an apartment there. And I had to walk down the hill to get to the pub. And I got like halfway down the hill. And I don't even know how this happened or even really what happened, but basically lost control of my bowels, shat myself. I was wearing these pants. They weren't leather, but like they were skin tight leather look, basically a plastic bag. And I was halfway down the hill and I'm like, I don't have the spoons to go back up the hill for a start. I can't go home. I'm so tired. And so I'm just going to keep going. So I just went to the bar. And then I went to the bathroom to sort of try and clean up a bit. But ultimately, I was literally wearing shit pants. And I just went, sat at the bar, had a drink, like just hung out for a bit. And you couldn't smell. I mean, if I'd smelled, I
was just about
absolutely...
to say, did you
yeah.
smell?
No. There was absolutely no odor. Thank God. I would not have done that if you could smell anything. And I think most people are just repulsed right now and gone, there's just no way you could pay me to go out with shit in my pants. But like when you have like saved up all your spoons for like this one thing to see a friend you haven't seen for a while, and I don't have enough in the tank to get home on my own anyway. I was just like, fuck it, I'm going. Anyway, so I can still laugh about that now, and you just have to like, I don't know, you don't have to do anything, but like Nat, I find using humor as an external observer and just looking at the absurdity of being a human and the ridiculousness of how like our bodies can be and when they fail and what goes wrong. It's either laugh or cry, and I'd personally just rather laugh. The other thing that I will say in closing is the other part that I find really helpful for me is to look for silver linings. And this is not to take away from the magnitude of how shit that experience was, literally and figuratively. But also just like for me, if you look hard enough, there's always some opportunity for growth and development, even if it's more compassion for other people or more compassion for yourself. But for me, looking at the silver lining and what good came out of it. And I won't give you like a list of everything that came out of it for me, but I remember thinking, I'm so grateful to have discovered I have a mold susceptible gene and have figured out, healthy homes and how to treat it before I have children. Because if I was to go through this pregnant, the impact that would have on my unborn child would be devastating. It would result in health issues for my infant that I would have not understood as a parent otherwise. So I'm so grateful for that. It also explains a lot of random on and off symptoms I had as a child. I can look back now through a mold testing technician lens and see what was wrong with those properties and the fact that it would have been water damage that made me sick. And I now feel comforted by these unexplained symptoms that I had intermittently. I now know what caused them. It's not a mystery. I also, as a clinician, recognized actually some of my patients who had chronic illness, or we sort of got 80% of the way there and never fully resolved it. I'm like, environment. And I went back and contacted as many as I could reach and actually talked them through what I'd learned. And almost without exception, there was water damage and mold going on, and we were able to kind of go, okay, this is the missing piece for you. And I wasn't well enough to support them, but it allowed them to kind of follow another thread that wasn't available before. What else did I learn for myself? A very harsh lesson for me was like, every time I had a bit of energy, I would like try and spend it all on work, or like trying to operate like I used to before I got sick. So learning to adjust my expectations and output, and being firm with that for myself and communicating that to others was just something that I had never had to do before. Learning to rest, learning to budget the energy that I had, learning to spend some of it on myself instead of productivity was another big thing. And obviously I'm so grateful to have lifted the lid on environmentally acquired illnesses, and I'm in a unique position where I do a lot of education in the practitioner space, and I'm so grateful that I can take a really awful thing that happened to me, that is happening to others, and start to bring awareness and education around that, so that one day in the future this isn't going to be something that people end up having to put up with long term, or that it's a mystery illness, or they get labeled a hypochondriac, or they get diagnosed with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and then that's it, that's your life. It literally doesn't have to be that way. So there are so many, blessings that came out of it. Ultimately,
Plus, you learnt that you can shit yourself and still show up.
still going out. Did not have that on my life plan, but I'll take it.
Thanks for running the experiment for us. Yeah, there's so many, isn't there? And, similar to you, I have plenty of things that I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had. And it's not to say that I would wish myself to go through them again. I certainly wouldn't. But like I said earlier, I would not be here speaking to everyone right now. I don't think that I would be nearly as much of a skilled, compassionate practitioner as I feel like I am today without having those experiences. And I feel like I don't think I would have met my husband. Like, there's different things that happened to lead me to be in the place where he was at, where we would not have crossed paths otherwise. And some of my best friends I've met through choices I made based on the health experience that I had, and not directly but indirectly of our paths wouldn't have crossed if I, taking 10 steps backwards kind of thing. So yeah, I think it is an important piece of it. If you can get there, when you can get there in your own time, is trying to find those silver linings while not invalidating your own experience. And the final thing that I will say is something that really, really helped me, still helps me. I still speak to clients every single day of the week that I'm consulting about this, is dropping the comparison. Like, the reality is, like, every single person has something. For some people it will be in the health context, and some people's barometer or quote unquote weakness or thing that they struggle with might be their energy. For someone else it might be their skin. For someone else it might be their periods. For someone else it might be fertility. For someone else it might be gut health. And if it's not health related, it's something else. Like, we don't get a free ride in life. It's like, I'm not a pessimist by any means, but I do think that, as much as my rose-colored glasses don't like coming off, I do think that life is hard. Like, there is suffering and challenge involved, and I don't think anyone gets a free ride. And I think we often take for granted the areas of our life or our health that feel very smooth and breezy, and that we don't need to put a lot of conscious active effort into, and we then hyper focus in on the areas that we are struggling with. But then when we see someone else not struggling with the things we struggle with, I think we then, if we're not conscious, make an assumption that everything in their life must be amazing because they're not struggling with the thing that you're struggling most with. And I just think comparison gets you nowhere. Like, nowhere. It really, really doesn't. And I feel like that's one of the greatest gifts of being a practitioner, is that you have the privilege of hearing so many people's vulnerabilities and stories and struggles. And I think that this is why I love that there is more conversation out there. I love when people are brave enough to be honest when they feel like they can about their struggles, because I think it just stops this perpetual thing of thinking that everyone else has it easier or better. I just think it looks different, and it comes in seasons as well. So really just also not feeling guilty when you get to finally a season of ease, or things are going well but maybe someone in your life is still struggling. I think it's really important to just try and be with the moments that feel easeful, joyful, happy, playful, smooth, and then also be with the moments that aren't, and just try to talk yourself back from that comparison as best you can, and have honest conversations with your friends, or invite people into your world where it's not all hidden and highlight reels, but it's a balance of all of it.
Yes, I think that's such sage advice. And look, I think Nat and I have a front row seat to the fact that our body has the most extraordinary capacity to heal. Same with our brain and our mind and our energy field. And so I really believe that with the right support, you can overcome just about anything. But in the meantime, while you're in it, we absolutely understand what you're going through. We're sending you so much love, and we certainly hope that this episode has helped make you feel a little less alone, and maybe inspired you with some strategies just to help you get through the chapter that you're currently in.
Well said. And on that note, only one final announcement for today's chat, which is just a sneaky quick reminder that we are running a live progesterone masterclass, and all of the information about it will be in the show notes of this episode. You can also check out the page via the link in my Instagram bio. We're going to be going through all things progesterone, which is really important for easeful cycles, periods, breaking away from any PMS symptoms. And as always, we're going to be going in lots of detail, even more detail than we go in on the podcast. So if you're keen to be in that room, make sure that you sign up ASAP. There is an early bird special on, if you haven't missed it by the time you listen to this episode. And we would love to have you in the room with us.